unveil. Along with a strong, spirited call, an enormous red brocade fell to the ground. Roaring cheer exploded from the crowd of thousands. This was a golden, divine statue of the Crown Prince. A sword in one hand, a flower in the other, symbolizing the power to end the world, but with a heart as gentle as a flower. The face of that statue was soft and beautiful, the brows long and elegant, lips thin and clean, and slightly curved as if smiling. Affectionate but not coquettish, fierce but not heartless, it was a compassionate and handsome face. This was the 8,000th temple of the Crown Prince within the kingdom of Xianle. 3 years after Ascension, there were 8,000 temples raised in his name. Such a passionate following was unseen in history, and likely would not have any more like it in the future, the one and only. However, his 8,000th temple didn't have the most glamorous divine statue of the Crown Prince. Atop Mount Taesang, the summit where the Crown Prince resided in his youth during training, was renamed to the Crown Prince Summit. It was where the first Xianle Pavilion was built. Once the first divine statue of the Crown Prince was sculpted, it was also there where the king personally unveiled it. That divine statue of the Crown Prince was 5 meters high, its craftsmanship legendary. It was built of pure, solid gold, truly an invaluable golden body. Within the Xianle Pavilion, devotees were endless, breaking through the threshold. The incense vessel before the pavilion was stuffed with incense, long and short, and the donation box was also much bigger than the average donation boxes in other temples. Because if it wasn't built big enough, it would be full of offerings before the day was over, and those who came after wouldn't be able to donate. In the courtyard of the temple was a clear pond, also filled with coins, shimmering brightly in the water. Many of the turtles residing in the ponds didn't dare to peep their heads out anymore from all the coins that were thrown by the devotees, many bouncing off their shells. No matter how the cultivators asked the people not to do so, they were fruitless. Within the massive red walls of the temple were planted plum trees, the branches tied with countless bright red ribbons of wishes, painting an impressive scenery of flowing red amongst a sea of blossoms. As for the interior of the temple, Xianle was seated just below his divine statue, watching over the crowd. No one could see him, but he could see and hear their chatter. How come the temple of the Crown Prince doesn't have prostration cushions? Yeah, even the temple master said that we can't prostrate. The temple's already unveiled, so why can't we prostrate? Another said, this must be your first time at the Xianle Pavilion. The Xianle Pavilions are all like this. I hear that after His Royal Highness ascended, he sent dreams to many of the temple donors and to the temple master, telling them not to have the devotees prostrate. So, none of the temples of the Crown Prince have anywhere that you can prostrate. Although no one could see him, Xianle still nodded his head. However, a few others laughed. And what's the logic in that? Aren't we meant to prostrate before gods? That must have been a rumor. Xianle erred. Another added, that's right, we must kneel. Only kneeling can show our sincerity. Thus, one took the lead and knelt down, and soon after, a large number of others followed suit and knelt down on the ground. Hundreds and thousands of people squished inside and outside of the great hall and started kowtowing before the divine statue, their forms rising and falling, muttering and silently praying for blessings. Xianle quietly hid. Never mind, we'll take it slowly, he said. The next moment, a large wave of noise came at him from all around. Achieve a high rank, a high rank. This year, I must achieve a high rank. If I obtain it, I will return my gratitude. Pray for safe passage. The girl I like likes my shishong. Please make him uglier, I beg you. I won't believe I still can't give birth to a fucking chubby brat. There were all kinds of prayers. Xianle was getting a headache just listening, and hurriedly cast a spell, blocking out those endless voices. His ears had only just quieted down when there was yelling, and a man clad in black came running out from the back of the pavilion, his hands covering his ears. He roared, "What the hell are those prayers?" The devotees also didn't sense the appearance of this man and continued to kowtow. Xianle breathed a sigh, patted the man's shoulder, and laughed. "Fengxin, thanks for your hard work." Such an exuberant Xianle Pavilion. The number of prayers that Xianle could hear every day exceeded thousands. At first, he was filled with the energy brought forth by the new position. He had little care whether the matters were big or small, and worked through them personally. After a while, there were really way too many prayers, so he'd split off a block and gave them to Fengxin and Mu Qing. What was within his duties and what could be ignored. After filtering through the prayers, the two would pass the important matters back to him. After filtering through the prayers, Mu Qing would report back without ever a complaint. But Fengxin, on the other hand, just couldn't understand why there were so many who'd blindly pray over petty business. Even blessings for harmonious bedchamber matters were brought to the Xianle Pavilion. Xianle was a martial god and certainly couldn't take care of such things. This kept up and offended other heavenly officials too, blaming them for taking matters they had no control over, taking devotees they had no business taking, to which Xianle couldn't rebut. Fengxin still had his hands covering his ears, even if that gesture did nothing. "Your Highness, why do you have so many female devotees?" Xianle shook out his sleeves and remained seated within the clouds of incense, smiling. "What's wrong with having so many female devotees? Beauties are like the clouds, pleasing to the eye." Fengxin dropped his face. "It's not good at all. It's like those female devotees had no other prayers than wishing to look nicer, marry nicer, or give birth to a nice son. Nothing of importance. Just looking at them gives me a headache." Xianle grinned and was about to continue when suddenly there was a commotion amongst the crowd. The two looked outside the hall and heard someone speak with a low voice. "Prince Xiaojing has come. Let's get out of here. Prince Xiaojing is here." Hearing Prince Xiaojing, it was like everyone had heard the devil. All dropped their faces and dispersed like birds. A moment later, it was as if a tornado blew by, and all the devotees who were within the hall escaped. Soon after, a young man, dressed in a lavish brocade and a cape, crossed the threshold swaggering, a glass gem lamp in his hands. Without looking at his eyes, his face resembled that of Xianle, but seeing the eyes, one would think him overly cocky. It was none other than Qi Rong. Qi Rong had reached the age of 17 or 18 by now. His face broadened, his disposition much more mature. He finally had an air of nobility. He entered through the doors, but didn't allow any of his attendants to come in. He held that lamp with both his hands and knelt down on the clean floors of the hall, his cape fluttering down. He raised the lamp to his forehead and solemnly prostrated. The two on top of the altar shared a look. Fengxin smacked his lips, and Xianle understood the annoyance in his eyes. 3 years ago, when Xianle first left the royal capital to travel the world, Qi Rong was still in detention. After his return, He hadn't yet had the chance to see his little cousin before he suddenly ascended that very night in his sleep. Within those 3 years, Xianle sent a number of dreams to his parents, to the Guo and a few others. He sent one to Qi Rong once, admonishing him to be kind to others from then on, to keep his behavior in check and not to cause trouble. Thus, Qi Rong had been doing his utmost to build temples everywhere, offering donations and lamps for good merits. Although he worked hard, sincere to the bone, he would still stir up trouble every now and then, and it would be Fengxin who had to go clean up after him. Because of this, Xianle could understand Fengxin's annoyance. On the floor, Qi Rong finished paying his respects and started whining. "Cousin Crown Prince, this is the 500th lamp I've offered. I'm such a loyal little brother. When will you come and see me? Even a dream is fine. Uncle and Auntie both miss you dearly, but you only ignore us. Truly high and mighty and cold." He did not notice at all that Fengxin was right there, who was reminding Xianle, "Don't pay attention to him. The Heavenly Emperor has told you that unless it's an important matter, heavenly officials are not allowed to show themselves privately before mortals. Families must be avoided." "Don't worry, I know," Xianle said. Qi Rong rose to his feet, holding that lamp, reached for a brush, and started writing on the lamp with his head lowered. Xianle and Fengxin felt bad, so they approached to see what he was writing. Seeing that it was something normal, like pray for the country's prosperity and blessed climate, and so on, and not praying for some family to be beheaded before the marketplace, the two breathed a sigh. Watching Qi Rong write so carefully and properly, Xianle was reminded of something. When Qi Rong first returned to the palace with his mother, there was once a group of royals and nobles who mounted Mount Tian to pray for blessings. Qi Rong's mother was a returnee after having eloped with such a lowly peasant and didn't dare to see anyone, but she always wanted blessings for her son, to have him experience the world and to not be stuffed inside like herself, turning into an ignorant nobody. So she begged the queen to take Qi Rong along with her. Although it was already kept fairly low-key, a royal scandal went around faster than an arrow, and there wasn't anyone in the royal capital who didn't know what had happened to mother and son. Thus, along the way, many sons of nobles purposely left Qi Rong out, not playing with him and not talking to him. Xianle saw a swing set and ran over to play, and all the children of the same age ran after him, taking turns to push the crown prince on the swings, taking it as an honorable task. When Xianle was swung to the highest point, he subconsciously looked down and saw Qi Rong hiding behind his mother's shadow, a head peeking out, watching him with envy. Once they reached the great martial hall, the grown-ups, after having offered lights, moved to beg the Guo for fortunes, or for deciphering their fortunes, and conversed amongst themselves, leaving the children within the hall to offer up small lamps for play. It was Qi Rong's first time meeting the queen, and he didn't know that she had already offered a light in his and his mother's name. He saw how beautiful the lamps were, and wanted to offer up one for blessings too. He was young and didn't understand much, so he asked all of those around how to write words of prayer for his mother. The children from Qi Rong's branch of the family already detested him, under the influence from their elders. They all thought that mother and son had shamed the family, so they intentionally tricked him. When Xianle finished writing on his lamp and put down the brush, he heard malicious giggling from behind, and when he turned his head, he saw Qi Rong with his hands covered in ink, holding a lamp like a precious treasure, his face full of smiles, about to offer the light. Yet on that lamp, the words, "Pray my mother and I pass away to the heavens, Qi Rong," were written in ugly scribbles. Xianle broke that lamp on the spot, furious and outraged. He wasn't very old at the time, but all the noble young men and children were terrified, prostrating on the ground, afraid to speak. After containing himself, Xianle personally rewrote prayers on a new lamp for Qi Rong, and no one dared play any tricks after that. Later, when they descended the mountain, Xianle went to swing on the swings again. This time, Qi Rong emerged from behind the queen and pushed him. He was shorter than Xianle, but he pushed especially enthusiastically, still gazing at him from below. Only this gaze had changed into one of worship. After that, he became Xianle's tail, wagging behind his cousin, Crown Prince. It must be said that Qi Rong had once been somewhat normal, but somehow had become more and more off the track along the way. However, in those 3 years, there were too many people and too many matters that Xianle had to care for, and he had no time for relations of old. He certainly didn't know whether Qi Rong had matured. While he was still reminiscing, Qi Rong had already offered his light and was getting ready to leave the hall. Unexpectedly, as he backed away, he bumped into another. Qi Rong staggered, then whipped around and started cursing without even seeing who it was. What the hell? Are you blind, or did you die on the spot, forgetting to move? The moment he opened his mouth, Xianle and Feng Xin both covered their faces, thinking, he hasn't changed at all, still the same. Maybe it was because he had lived with his father until he was 5 and couldn't help but be influenced by the rowdy market environment and his father's violent temper. But even after, when the queen patiently tried to educate Qi Rong, the moment he got agitated by the Guosha's words, he'd reveal his true form. The one who bumped into Qi Rong was an unkempt young man of 24 or 25 years, carrying a simple satchel, his straw slippers so worn that they were almost rimless and baseless, covered in dust. However, even though this young man was wan and sallow, his lips dried and crackling, his form slumping, his face was bright, thin but not weak, and his eyes were shining. "What is this place?" he asked. "This is the Xianle Pavilion, the temple of the Crown Prince," Qi Rong replied. The man started mumbling. "Temple of the Crown Prince? Crown Prince? So this is the palace?" He saw the divine statue inside, the gold reflecting on his face, and he asked again, "Is that gold?" Seeing how glamorous this pavilion was, he had taken the temple as a royal palace. A guard approached to chase him away, and Qi Rong said, "Of course it's gold. The temple of the Crown Prince is a temple, not the pavilion at the imperial palace. You don't even know where you are. Where did a barbarian like you come from?" "Then where is the palace?" the man asked. Qi Rong squinted his eyes. "Why do you ask?" That man replied in a serious tone, "I need to go to the palace and see the king. I have something to tell him." Qi Rong and the guards burst out laughing, their expressions condescending. Where did this country bumpkin come from? "You want to do what at the palace? Want to see the king? Is he someone you can see just because you want to? They probably won't even let you through the gates when you get there." That man didn't seem to be affected by the taunt. "I'll go try. Maybe it'll work." Qi Rong laughed. "Then go try." Then he raised his hand and purposely pointed it in the wrong direction. "Thanks," that man said. He adjusted his satchel, then turned to walk out of the hall. When he reached the stone bridge, he suddenly stopped in his step. Through the clear pond water, layers upon layers of coins could be seen sunken below. That young man seemed to have pondered for a moment, and the next second he leapt over the bridge railing and jumped into the pond. He was agile and skilled. Once in the pond, he bent down and started fishing up bundles and bundles of coins, stuffing them into the satchel in his arms. Since they had never seen anyone who dared to steal the offerings of a god, Xianle and Fengxin were both stunned. Qi Rong was also taken aback and immediately erupted in anger, rushing to the bridge and slapped at the railing, yelling, "What the fuck? What are you doing? Someone pull him out. What the actual fuck?" A number of guards immediately jumped into the water to pull that young man out, but unexpectedly he was also quite skilled, throwing punches and kicks, not letting anyone close. Qi Rong was jumping up and down in rage, and none of the cultivators in the yard could do anything. That young man fished up a bag full and heavy with coins. He carried his satchel anew and was ready to climb ashore, but accidentally stepped on moss. His feet slipped and he fell back into the waters with a large splash. The guards thus took this chance to seize him, wrangling him back ashore. Qi Rong raised his leg to stomp, yelling, "You dare steal this money?" When Qi Rong raised his leg, Fengxin was already standing on the side, catching the right moment and blocked. So it looked like Qi Rong's stomp was vicious, but it actually landed lightly. Although Qi Rong couldn't see the one playing tricks, he still felt like something was off, like a ghost was clinging to his leg. He kicked a number of times, and it was the same feeling, making him feel rather lousy. That young man seemed to have choked on water and coughed a few times. That money was just laying there in the pond. Why can't I use it to save people? Qi Rong, unsatisfied by his kicks, finally stopped from irritation. Save who? Who are you? Where did you come from? He only asked so he could sentence that young man to a crime and throw him into prison. But that young man still answered honestly. "My name is Lang Ying. I'm from Yong'an. We're going through a drought, and there's no water. The crops won't grow, and everyone's starving because there's no income. There's water here, and food, and money. You use gold to build statues and throw coins into the water, so why can't you share some with us?" Yong'an was a large city within the kingdom of Xianle. Xianle rose to his feet, his expression serious. "Fengxin, there's a drought in Yong'an. How come I didn't hear of this?" Fengxin turned his head back. "I don't know. I didn't hear anything either. Let's ask Mu Qing later."